Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thought she was walking into just another hearing. But Mike Johnson brought a color-coded binder to absolutely dismantle her entire political career. She had told the Speaker of the House that the only thing he'd ever passed was a collection plate. She had survived J.D. Vance and his brutal receipts. She had survived John Kennedy, reading her own quotes back to her in a slow Louisiana drawl. But she did not survive Mike Johnson. Not because Johnson was angrier, sharper, or more theatrical than the men who came before him. It was because Johnson didn't attack. He didn't tell stories. Johnson taught. He opened a binder. Not some thin, flimsy folder, a massive, thick, tabbed, color-coded binder. The exact binder of a guy who used to grade papers. And in 40 flat minutes, he walked her through a devastating performance review that any 8-year congresswoman should have passed in her sleep. Locate Venezuela on a map. Articulate a clear stance on Taiwan. Pass a single piece of legislation into law. Answer the damn phones in your own district office. File your FEC paperwork without triggering an audit. 5 basic tests. 5 catastrophic failures. And when he hit her with that final, inescapable question, Representative, what grade would you give yourself? 30 million people watching already knew the answer, because you are witnessing exactly what happens when the most followed member of Congress runs headfirst into a former teacher who brought a binder instead of a weapon. And trust me, the binder is far worse, and I find it extraordinary, Mr. Speaker, that a man who believes the earth is 6,000 years old, who voted to overturn a presidential election, and who took 3 painful weeks to win the gavel because his own party couldn't stomach him, is now sitting in judgment of my record. AOC was 7 minutes deep into an opening statement her PR team engineered as a preemptive strike. It was never a defense of her actual record. It was a calculated attack on the institution, questioning it. The House Rules Committee hearing room, the Capitol, H. 313. Smaller than the Senate rooms where Vance and Kennedy did their damage. More intimate. The cameras shoved right in your face. It was rigged for what the networks were already hyping as the third major showdown. C-SPAN carried it entirely live. Every major network split-screened it. AOC sat at that witness table with the hardened posture of a woman who had survived this grinder twice before. Her body had learned from Vance, hands locked down, jaw clamped tight, the water glass completely untouched. Her body had learned from Kennedy's 0 pointless gestures, absolutely no leaning forward unless it meant something, and definitely no tears. She sat there wrapped in the armor of a woman who had been destroyed twice on national television and rebuilt herself both times. You could physically see the rebuilding in her dead-still precision. At minute 8, she stared a hole straight through Speaker Johnson. You lecture me about legislative productivity? You couldn't pass a budget. You couldn't pass immigration reform. You couldn't even keep your own caucus from tearing itself apart for a single news cycle. The only thing you've consistently passed, Mr. Speaker, is the collection plate. So before you question my conduct, maybe finish your own homework. The gallery let out a noise, that sharp, highly practiced sound. The exact same woman questioning the Speaker's baseline competence had, barely 3 months prior, confidently told the Munich Security Conference that Venezuela was located below the equator. Newsflash: Venezuela is above the equator. It has been sitting safely above the equator for roughly 4.5 billion years. Speaker Mike Johnson sat dead center on the dais. Dark suit, red tie, wearing the exact face of a guy who has spent 30 years navigating courtrooms and classrooms, knowing the difference between the two is razor thin. His binder sat heavy on the desk, thick, color-coded tabs glaring directly at the gallery. The binder of a man who absolutely refuses to improvise and completely refuses to rush. He stayed completely silent during AOC's opening attack. He was just writing. Small, neat, methodical handwriting. The handwriting of a former constitutional law professor mentally grading papers in real time. He looked up at AOC. Not a hostile look, not condescending. It was the heavy look of a teacher holding a disastrous transcript, gearing up for a tough conversation, choosing to be kind. Because in this brutal arena, kindness destroys you infinitely faster than cruelty. Representative, I appreciate that. I truly do. He cracked open the binder. I am not going to argue with you today. I am going to walk you through something. Think of it as a performance review. On the 13th of February 2026, 3 months ago, you attended the Munich Security Conference. This is the ultimate global gathering of foreign policy heavyweights. Heads of state attend. Defense ministers attend. You showed up because people are floating your name as a potential presidential candidate for 2028, and a presidential candidate desperately needs foreign policy credentials. He flipped to the very first tab. Printed transcripts. 2 of them. During a panel on global security, you were asked this exact question: would and should the United States actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move? He locked eyes with her. Representative, this is the single most critical binary question in American foreign policy. It is the absolute baseline question that every president, every secretary of state, and every serious candidate for national office must be able to answer. The answer can be nuanced, it can be conditional, it can be deeply strategic, but an answer must actually exist. He read her response out loud. Word for word. No edits, no commentary, skipping absolutely nothing. Your exact answer was, I think that, this is such, I think that this is of course a very long-standing, policy of the United States, and I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation, and for that question to even arise. He slapped the transcript down. That was 20 painful seconds of empty filler, followed by a sentence containing absolutely zero policy. Not a hawkish stance, not a dovish stance, not a conditional stance, no stance at all. You got hit with the most important question in foreign policy, and you choked out 20 seconds of ums and uhs, literally begging for the question to just go away. Now, Representative, let me show you what a real policy sounds like. It doesn't have to be my policy. It doesn't have to be your policy. It just has to be a damn policy. The United States should maintain strategic ambiguity while strengthening Taiwan's defenses. That is a position. The United States should commit to defending Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act. That is a position. The United States should avoid military entanglement in the Pacific and push for diplomacy. That is a position. What you delivered in Munich wasn't a position. It was the sound of someone who completely skipped the reading. He flipped to the second transcript. 3 days later, at the Technical University in Berlin, they asked you about the previous administration arresting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. You said, and I quote, "That doesn't mean that we can capture a head of state and engage in aggressive acts just because the nation is below the equator." He let the silence hang. Representative, Venezuela is above the equator. It sits perfectly between approximately 1 degree and 12 degrees north latitude. The entire territory of Venezuela, every state, every city, every single village, is firmly in the northern hemisphere. This isn't up for debate. This is basic geography. Now, I want to be fair. Everyone botches a fact. I've done it. The issue isn't the mistake itself. The issue is the massive gap that mistake exposes. You flew out to the most elite foreign policy summit on Earth, entirely on the taxpayer's dime, to audition for the presidency of the United States, and you didn't even know where Venezuela was on a map. He yanked out a third paper, a standard State Department briefing book. Every member of Congress attending these international summits gets one of these books from the State Department. The Munich 2026 book was 247 pages long. Venezuela is broken down on page 12. The map is literally on page 13. The equator is clearly marked. Representative, the briefing book is your homework, and based on your disaster in Munich, you didn't bother reading a single page. Mark Halperin, who is absolutely no Republican, called your Munich trip one of the biggest disasters she's ever made if she wants the White House. Glenn Greenwald, definitely not a Republican, wrote, "Whoever convinced AOC she finished her tutoring needs to be fired immediately." The New York Times, hardly a Republican mouthpiece, called it a stumble, and the President of the United States publicly said it was not a great look for the country. Foreign policy, representative. That is subject number 1 on this review. The grade is a total fail. He paused. Not for dramatic effect, for pure pedagogy. The heavy, suffocating pause of a teacher handing back a failing grade, giving the student a brutal second to process it before moving on, because rushing it is cruel, and cruelty wasn't the mission. Now, I need to add something. I am not here to humiliate you. I am here to deal in reality. The Munich conference was your ultimate audition. Every political analyst alive knew you went there to prove you belonged on the world stage, to show you had the grit, the prep, and the intellect to talk global security with heavyweights, and the audition crashed and burned. Not because you lack intelligence, I don't believe that for a second. It crashed because you completely refused to prepare. People have been asking that Taiwan question to serious politicians for 2 solid decades. The structure is entirely known. There are 4 or 5 standard frameworks to answer it. Any basic briefing book, any junior foreign policy staffer, any 30-minute chat with a State Department aide would have handed you at least one of those frameworks. You showed up empty-handed, after 8 years in Congress, after serving on let me double-check this 0 foreign policy committees, after flying to Germany on taxpayer money to audition for the toughest job on earth, you had absolutely no framework for the most predictable question in global politics. That is not a gaffe, representative. A gaffe is a simple slip of the tongue. This is a gaping hole. A massive gap between the job you desperately want and the actual work you did to get there. Your own party called it out. Democratic strategist Hank Scheinkopf, not a Republican, told The Hill she is not ready for prime time on the global stage. The New York Times called it a stumble, and when they call something a stumble, representative, it means they desperately wanted to call it a total disaster. But their editors intervened. Foreign policy. First subject. Failed. AOC's right hand, the one flat on the table, locked in that post-Vance, post-Kennedy iron discipline, twitched upward. Not a full gesture. Not a point. It hovered about 4 inches off the wood, a ghost movement with no destination, the aborted start of a physical reaction her body fired off before her brain could kill it. It was the hand of a woman whose native tongue is physical motion, a woman who spent 8 years controlling the narrative by pointing, sweeping, opening, and closing her hands. Her body, despite 2 brutal hearings of hardcore training, couldn't completely kill the urge to talk with her hands when her mouth was forced shut. The hand hovered for 1 painfully long second. She caught it, yanked it back, smashed it flat against the table with the aggressive force of someone burying something trying to claw its way out. Johnson flipped to the next tab. Let's talk about your district, Representative. New York's 14th Congressional District holds roughly 718,000 human beings. They live across the Bronx and Queens. The poverty rate hits 16%. Unemployment is sitting at 9%. These are your people. They voted for you to have their backs. Which means, bare minimum, your office needs to actually be open for them. He read straight from a printed New York Post investigation dropped in early 2026. Your Bronx district office is open exactly 1 weekday per week. He let that pathetic number hang in the air. 1. Your Queens office shuts down entirely on Fridays. Your phones, according to endless constituents interviewed by the Post, ring completely into the void. People begging for help with federal nightmares, Social Security, immigration files, veterans' benefits are told to make an appointment or get lost. He pulled a direct quote. A guy named Lauro Vasquez from Woodside told the Post, "This woman has done zero for the community she was elected to serve. Your latest town hall, which got delayed because you got sick right after wrapping up a fighting oligarchy national tour with Senator Sanders, lasted less than 60 minutes. You fielded exactly 6 questions. 6, from a jammed auditorium of desperate people who waited for hours just to see their congresswoman in person. Then you bailed out a side door, straight into an idling SUV." He slammed the article down. "Representative, let me explain how constituent service actually works. I know, because I grind it out. Every real member in this building does it, or is supposed to. Constituent service means you pick up the damn phones. It means your doors stay open. It means a senior in Parkchester, panicking over a missing Social Security check, can walk right in, no appointment necessary, and talk to a living, breathing human. It means a veteran in Jackson Heights fighting the VA gets an answer on the first ring. Your office burns through requests at a rate that our committee calculated is 31% slower than the House average for New York. You take 23 business days to answer basic casework. The House average is 9. Representative, I'm going to bring up my own district, not to flex, just to compare. My office in Shreveport is open 5 days a week. Real people answer the phones, not a machine. During every business hour, if someone calls about Social Security, we hit them back in 48 hours, not 23 days. 48 hours. I run open mic town halls every single quarter. No screened questions, no ticking clocks. I stand there until the very last hand drops. I don't run away in an SUV. I'm not claiming I'm a better representative than you. I am saying a baseline standard exists, and by that absolute minimum standard of the job you begged for, you are completely failing your district." He slid out a printed calendar. A hard data analysis of her media hype versus actual district grinding from December 2025 to February 2026. Your public schedule featured the Fighting Oligarchy Tour with Sanders. 14 cities spanning 7 states. A massive keynote at a San Francisco Progressive Summit. Endless national TV hits, and the Munich Security Conference in Germany. In that exact same window, your district schedule featured one single town hall delayed, then capped at under an hour, and standard office hours at a Jackson Heights location that locks its doors on Fridays. 14 cities to fight the oligarchy, 1 pathetic hour for your actual voters. 6 questions. 1. Getaway SUV. Representative, I am not attacking your ideology. I am attacking your total lack of attendance. Constituent service is the absolute bedrock of a congressional seat. It isn't sexy. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't clip well on social media. But it is the actual job. And the people sweating it out on $31,000 a year in Jackson Heights, the families freezing in Parkchester in January, they don't care about your Munich panel. They need someone to pick up the phone. Constituent service. Subject 2. Failed. AOC's left hand drifted toward her phone. The phone sitting dead on the table right next to her binder. The exact spot it lived in, every hearing, every back room, every space she occupied. Because that phone wasn't a piece of tech. It was a vital organ, a hardwired extension of a nervous system feeding off 13 million followers for 8 straight years. Her hand crawled toward it, the way hands instinctively grab for a lifeline under massive stress. The unconscious drift toward the screen that validates, connects, and supplies the roaring applause. This dead silent room was completely denying her. The crawl stopped exactly 1 inch away. Her body realized, not cognitively, but on a raw, muscular level, that she was literally reaching for the exact addiction Johnson was destroying her over. She killed the movement, forcing her hand into her lap, but that 1 inch of drift, that desperate twitch toward the screen, toward the digital echo chamber that didn't exist in H313, was already caught on the C-SPAN camera over her right shoulder. That 1 inch was the entire story. In a brutal room where a teacher was ripping her apart for ignoring her constituents' phone calls, her very first reflex was to reach for the machine that made her famous. Johnson flipped the tab. Representative, in 8 full years sitting in the United States Congress, you have authored precisely 0 bills that became law. He said, it totally flat, the way a teacher reads a score so devastatingly low that rubbing it in would just be cruel. 0. 8 years, 0 laws. You rolled out the Green New Deal back in 2019. It was a non-binding piece of paper. It never saw a vote. It never sniffed becoming law. When economists slapped a price tag of $51 to $93 trillion on it and asked how you'd pay for it, you told them they sounded like Dr. Evil. Representative, that is not an answer to a funding question. That is a cheap deflection. And deflection is not legislation. You later tried to steal credit for pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA doesn't have a single drop of Green New Deal DNA in it. Not one. Taking credit for other people's heavy lifting isn't a legislative victory. It's a PR stunt. The data shows you are the 6th least bipartisan member among all House Democrats. Bipartisanship isn't just a buzzword. It's the hard metric of whether you can actually push a proposal across the finish line into reality. In 8 years, you have completely failed to prove you can do that. Not even once. He paused, adjusted his glasses. Not some theatrical prop move like Kennedy. Just a guy who needed his glasses to read the ugliest section of the report. Now, let's talk about your FEC filings. I'm skipping the legal angle. The Ethics Committee and the FEC are handling that. Let's look at it as pure management incompetence. You paid a psychiatrist $18,725 and listed it as leadership training and consulting. Look, putting the law aside, a functional congressional office flags that instantly. Real operations have compliance checks. Real campaigns have treasurers auditing the books. Writing off a ketamine-specializing psychiatrist as leadership training doesn't happen in a tight ship. It happens when nobody is checking the work. Then there's the $885,000 shuffled through brand new Congress LLC, while your own chief of staff ran both the LLC and your campaign. Former FEC chiefs called it potentially massive trouble. That is not a partisan hit job. That is an audit failure. And it triggered an audit because someone in your camp built a financial structure so sloppy it begged for an investigation. Representative, smart people don't get investigated this much. Not because they are angels, but because they are meticulous. They check the damn homework before handing it in. Legislative record and office management. Subjects 3 and 4. Failed. AOC's body shifted. Her face stayed frozen, but she physically shrank. the elbows she usually kept wide staking her claim, dominating the frame, being the biggest alpha in the room, caved inward 2 solid inches. Her shoulders, pinned back in flawless discipline from the last 2 interrogations, rolled forward. Not a total collapse, just a pathetic contraction, the body language of someone being ground into dust not by shouting, but by cold, hard facts. It's that exact shrinking reaction you see in a classroom when a teacher airs out a horrific report card and the kid instinctively tries to vanish into the chair, hoping being small makes the failing grades disappear. She wasn't melting down. She was retreating inward. And the wide-angle C-SPAN shot catching her entire posture broadcasted it perfectly to the world. The woman who built an empire on taking up all the oxygen was now begging to be invisible. Johnson hit the final tab. His voice shifted. Not louder, warmer. That specific, heavy warmth of a teacher dropping brutal grades on a kid they actually gave a damn about. Knowing the warmth won't fix the grade, but it might just force them to listen. Representative, I taught before I got here. I taught constitutional law. I stood at a whiteboard for years. And I learned a hard truth about students that perfectly applies to this building. The kids who fail spectacularly aren't the untalented ones. Almost never. The ones who crash and burn are the ones who got told they were geniuses way too early, and never had a single person care enough to look them dead in the eye and tell them the brutal truth about where they actually stand. I think you have massive talent, Representative. I think you are one of the most lethal, naturally gifted communicators this place has ever seen. You have a raw ability to connect with a crowd that most politicians would sell their souls for. I truly mean that. But talking into a camera is not governing. Going viral is not legislating. Sound bites are not laws. And your followers are absolutely not your constituents. Because followers hit unsubscribe, constituents are stuck with you. So I am going to do something no one in your echo chamber has ever had the guts to do. I am going to show you the mirror. Not to humiliate you, but because you desperately need an honest reality check, and the army of yes-men, consultants, media fluffers, and 13 million sycophants hovering around you for 8 years have completely failed to give you one. Foreign policy. At the biggest security summit on the planet, you couldn't find Venezuela on a map and totally blanked on Taiwan. That is a hard fail. Constituent service. Your offices operate part-time at best. Your phones are dead. Your last town hall was a pathetic under-an-hour stunt where you answered 6 questions before speeding off in an SUV. Your own voters told the press, you have done nothing. That is a hard fail. Legislative output. 8 years. 0 bills signed. The Green New Deal is a ghost. The IRA credit is stolen valor. Hard fail. Financial management. Your campaign sparked multiple FEC probes, an ethics nightmare, and tried to pass off a ketamine doctor as leadership consulting. Hard fail. And there is one last category that wasn't on the syllabus, but we're grading it today. Conviction. In 2019, you blasted the present vote on impeachment as pure cowardice. You screamed, "We are sent here to lead." Then, in 2021, on the Iron Dome, vote the absolute bare minimum funding to stop rockets from slaughtering Israeli civilians, you voted present. You literally did the exact cowardly thing you torched others for. Then you had a total meltdown crying on the floor, drafted a 4-page apology letter, flipped your stance in 2024, and then flipped your flip in 2026. 5 different stances on one single issue in 5 years. Representative, conviction doesn't get graded on a curve. You either stand for something, or you stand for nothing. And looking at this catastrophic record, 5 stances, 5 years, 1 issue, you stand for absolutely nothing. That is a hard fail. He stared at her. It was that lethal stare teachers use when they force a kid to read the writing on the wall themselves, because a lesson you deduce is a lesson you can't unlearn. It wasn't vicious, it wasn't a victory lap, it was the heavy stare of a guy dropping an F, knowing his job is over and the nightmare is entirely on the student now. Representative, I have handed out a lot of grades in my life. Most were earned, some hurt to give, but the absolute most agonizing grades to hand out aren't to the kids who don't care. The worst grades go to the brilliantly talented ones, the ones who have every single tool to dominate, but completely refuse to do the work. The talent just makes the failure so much more pathetic. The talent makes dropping that F physically hurt, because you look at them and know they could have been unstoppable. They had the world in their hands, and they threw it in the trash. Representative, after 8 years in the United States Congress, 8 years of media worship, 13 million followers, Munich invites, Met Gala red carpets, oligarchy tours, and relentless presidential hype. After all of that noise, what exact grade would you give yourself? 7 seconds. 8. 9. 10. 11. Agonizing seconds. Inside a room way smaller than the ones Vance and Kennedy commanded, the silence wasn't just close. It was suffocating. It was deafening. 11 seconds in H313 felt like a lifetime compared to 12 seconds in Dirksen. AOC's eyes darted. Not to camera 3, that was her Kennedy survival reflex, hunting for the lens. Not down at the table, that was her Vance tactic, staring into the void. Her eyes shot straight to the exit sign. The glowing green sign slapped over the back door. A sign that had hung there through every single hearing she had ever sat through for 8 years, and one she had never, ever looked at, because she never wanted to leave. Hearings were her hunting ground. Hearings generated the viral clips. Hearings fed the followers. Hearings were the exact place Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez transformed into the godlike brand 13 million people worshipped. But right now, for the first time in an 8-year political career, she looked dead at the exit. Not because she was going to run, not because she was going to storm out, but because her body, the machine built to perform, to gesture, to hunt down lenses, to scroll phones, to dominate the room, had instinctively realized the only way out was away from the audience. It was totally involuntary. It lasted less than 2 seconds. She glanced at the escape route, then snapped back to Johnson. But in that microscopic 2-second window, the C-SPAN feed recorded the ultimate kill shot, a woman who built an empire on never leaving the spotlight, desperately praying to escape it. Johnson just waited. He let the dead air choke the room. Real teachers know silence after a brutal question isn't a glitch. It's the gears turning, and the gears turning here belong to a woman ordered to grade herself, realizing in real time that any truthful answer would completely destroy her on national television. Because the people back home, Johnson said, the 718,000 real people, whose calls you ignore, whose town halls you ditch after 6 questions, whose apartments freeze in January, who wait 23 days for a simple Social Security fix. They have been grading you for 8 years. And I think, Representative, if you get completely, brutally honest with yourself, the kind of honest that doesn't fly on Instagram, you know exactly what grade they'd slap on you. He slammed the binder shut. Not the fast, snappy Midwest close Vance used. Not the slow, drawn-out Louisiana theater Kennedy used. Johnson closed it with the heavy, depressing finality of a professor sealing a gradebook at the end of a disastrous semester. Done. Settled. Unfixable. I don't even need to say it. Representative, you already know. He glanced at the chairman. No further questions. AOC fired back. It lasted 1 minute and 52 seconds, her shortest counterattack ever. She spun Johnson's entire interrogation as violently sexist and deeply condescending, branded him a smug man treating a powerful woman of color like a clueless schoolgirl, weaponizing the system against her. She dodged Venezuela entirely. She ignored Taiwan. She totally avoided the locked district offices. She skipped over the pathetic 6-question town hall and her SUV escape route. She ignored the 0 laws passed. She ignored the shady FEC filings. She completely dodged the grade. Her response wasn't a total disaster. It was just totally hollow. And throwing up a hollow, deflective shield after a 40-minute, forensic, evidence-backed annihilation sounded exactly like what Johnson just spent 40 minutes proving a fraud deflecting from reality. And that deflection, no matter how politically savvy or algorithmically primed, was not an answer. Johnson barely blinked. He was already packing up. He shoved his pen down the spine of that thick, color-coded binder that looked identical to a teacher's grade book, because that is exactly what it was. He stood up, buttoned his jacket with methodical precision. A guy operating on the code that how you handle the details is how you handle the war. He didn't even look at her as he walked out. He had just spent 40 minutes flaying her alive. The grades were locked in. The record was permanent. And for the very first time in 8 years, the star student had absolutely nothing to say. The first clip to explode was "Venezuela is above the equator." Johnson reading her Munich word salad in full, complete with every pathetic and ah, followed by the merciless geography lesson delivered with the ice-cold patience of a guy grading a middle school map quiz. 22 seconds long, 26 million views in under 18 hours. The damage was structural. He didn't scream. He didn't mock her. He just read her own catastrophic words out loud and let the transcript hang itself. The second clip was the by-appointment-only nuke. Johnson reading off the locked doors, the dead phones, the 6 questions, and the SUV getaway. That clip didn't go viral like normal political red meat. It infected local politics. It ripped through constituent advocacy groups, city councils, and local activists who spend their lives screaming at politicians to just pick up the damn phone. It wasn't right-wing or left-wing. It was brutally professional. It was a man methodically listing the bare minimum requirements of a taxpayer-funded job and proving she utterly failed them. And the receipts were terrifying because they had zero to do with ideology. They were purely about doing the work. The third clip was the kill shot, the full sequence, from "What grade would you give yourself?" through 11 excruciating seconds of pure dead air, ending with "You already know." This clip broke the partisan matrix. Because the dread was universal. Every single human breathing who has ever been graded, assessed, or dragged into a boss office and told to justify their existence felt that question in their bones. And everyone recognized the silence. The terrifying silence of a fraud who knows they're busted and has nowhere to run. The fourth clip, the one that will haunt her until the end of time, was the exit sign. 2 raw seconds of C-SPAN footage. AOC's panicked eyes locking onto the glowing green exit sign above the door. No commentary needed. No context required. Just 2 seconds of an absolute camera addict begging for the cameras to cut to black. It became the ultimate visual shorthand for the total destruction of a brand. It went more viral than any spoken quote because it caught lightning in a bottle. The exact microsecond reality crushes the performance. The political fallout hit the only metric that mattered for 2028 raw competence. The Munich disaster, which the media tried to bury as a one-day glitch back in February, was permanently weaponized. Johnson didn't just expose Munich. He chained Munich to the dead phones, the zero bills, the FEC chaos, and the Iron Dome hypocrisy. He framed them not as random slip-ups, but as terminal symptoms of the exact same disease. It wasn't corruption. It was just massive, staggering incompetence. The terrifying gap between a carefully engineered PR hologram and the gritty reality required to do the actual job. Every 2028 opposition playbook instantly locked in the Taiwan transcript and the Venezuela geography fail, not as standard attack ads, but as absolute deal-breakers that would nuke any foreign policy debate. The panic hit fast. Within a week, her office quietly expanded Bronx, operating hours from 1 day to 3. The Queen's office silently started opening on Fridays. They desperately hooked up a second phone line in Jackson Heights. No press release, no victory lap. The same New York Post bloodhound who wrote the first hit piece sniffed out the quiet fixes. And that quiet fix was a massive confession. You do not fix a machine unless you admit it's completely broken. Fixing it right after the hearing was a total admission of guilt. The progressive media machine snapped completely in half, not along the performance lines from the Kennedy slaughter, but straight down the competence line. The nation tried to run interference, claiming foreign policy screw-ups are a bipartisan tradition. Jacobin fired back, declaring the left couldn't survive, with figureheads who only know how to read domestic cue cards. Pod Save America burned 11 minutes on it, and John Favreau, Obama's old speechwriter, dropped the heaviest bomb of the week. The Taiwan answer is a total disqualifier. Period. If you want the nuclear codes, you have to answer that. Not flawlessly, but you need an actual answer. AOC's qualified to be president numbers among primary voters totally collapsed. A massive 1.4-point nosedive in 2 weeks, crashing from 47% down to 33%. She didn't drop on likability. She didn't drop on speaking her mind. Kennedy already blew that up. She cratered on the one metric that separates a serious commander-in-chief from an Instagram influencer. Those 14 points were the lethal difference between a celebrity people hype online and a leader people trust with the country. And once that illusion shatters, you can't glue it back together. Johnson went totally dark on the press. When a Politico reporter ambushed him in a Capitol hallway, demanding to know if the hearing accomplished anything, Johnson stopped. He calculated it, the exact same meticulous way he processed everything. I taught for a long time. Teachers absolutely hate handing out failing grades. We do it because the kid desperately needs to know they are failing. What they do with that reality check is on them. He paused. I just pray she actually reads the briefing book next time. He walked onto the elevator. Out in Jackson Heights, Rosa Gutierrez was locking up her nail salon when her screen lit up. A text from Elena, a Tuesday regular for 3 years. The lady whose grandson drove Uber and threw AOC $20 a month. Did you see the bloodbath? Rosa had seen it. She caught the Munich disaster while fixing Mrs. Dominguez's acrylics. She watched the district office segment in total silence, standing alone in her apron after closing time. She fired back. I saw the part about the 6 questions. I saw my neighbor wait 3 hours for that joke of a town hall. 3 hours to ask about her dying mother's Social Security check. 6 questions, 1 hour. Then the SUV escape. Rosa didn't wait for a reply. She slammed the phone down, scrubbed the counter with a blue towel in hard, aggressive circles. She killed the TV, which was looping the exit sign panic attack for the 4th time today. She had already pulled the plug on her Act Blue donations after Vance gutted her. She kept her wallet shut after Kennedy exposed her. And there was 0 chance she was opening it now. The choice was dead and buried weeks ago. All that was left was the void, the empty space where $16 a month used to disappear, the space where blind faith used to survive, and no viral clip, no slick hearing, no binder full of failing grades could fix it. Because it wasn't about politics anymore. It was deeply personal. It was the sickening reality of a woman in Jackson Heights, burning 3 hours for a lifeline, while her congresswoman took 6 questions and peeled out in a black car. She bolted the door and cut the lights. Over in Middletown, Ohio, Crystal Atkins was taking a breather in the break room of the Brighter Days Recovery Center. Donna was in there too. The TV was blazing. The hearing had wrapped up an hour ago. 6 narratives, Crystal muttered. She wasn't ticking them off on her fingers this time. The list was burned into her brain. Omar. Pure corruption. Vance brought the receipts. AOC and Vance. The pattern. Attack first. Play the victim when cornered. Clinton and Kennedy. The elite system protecting its own. AOC and Kennedy. The performance. Choking on her own quotes. Clinton and Vance. The class war. $120 million versus a shoebox. She stopped. And now this. Johnson. Pure, unadulterated competence. She stared at the screen. They were running the replay. The exit sign. AOC's panicked eyes darting toward the green glow. This one is the most brutal of them all. Johnson didn't scream. He didn't drop opposition research. He didn't compare upbringings. He just read off the syllabus and graded her. Line by line, F after F. And she couldn't say a damn word. Not because she lost her voice, she never shuts up, but because the Fs were printed directly on her own record. You cannot debate your own transcript. Donna stared at the screen. You think this actually changes her? Crystal chewed on it. She looked at it the exact same way she looked at the addicts in the group room. The ones forced into interventions, the ones shown the undeniable wreckage of their own lives. Some snap out of it. Most don't. The brutal truth is always the same. The only variable is if they actually care enough to fix it. I don't know. But I know this. 6 stories. 6 total system failures. Corruption. The pattern. The system. The performance. The class divide. The utter lack of competence. And deep down, it is the exact same failure rotting at the core. What failure? Donna asked. Crystal leaned back. Staring up at the water-damaged ceiling the slumlord refused to fix since the winter of 2023. She stared at those stains every single night. They were as permanent as the cheap coffee cups she scrubbed in the sink. You know what my job is in that room? I sit across from broken people and force them to get honest about where they actually are, not the fairy tale they sell themselves, not the garbage they feed their families, where they truly are. How many days sober? How many relapses? How many lies? It is the most vicious question in rehab, because answering it means staring into the abyss between the fake story you tell the world and the absolute mess you are actually living. That is exactly what Mike Johnson did. He sat across from her and forced her to look at the gap. Not the political gap. That's just a cheap debate. The massive, horrifying gap between the utopia she promises and the total garbage she delivers. The gap between 13 million worshippers and one open office day in the Bronx. Between Munich elite panels and ignored Jackson Heights voters. Between a multi-trillion-dollar Green New Deal and 0 actual laws passed. Between screaming, "We are sent here to lead," and voting present like a coward. In recovery, we call that gap the distance. The brutal distance between the myth you sell and the reality you live. And that distance is what actually kills people. Not the drugs. The distance. Because the drugs are just the cheap trick you use to avoid looking at the distance. She stopped and locked eyes with Donna. Her drug is the camera. The retweets, the viral clips, that is the hit she chases so she doesn't have to look at her own failure. And Johnson, God bless that man, and his color-coded binder grabbed her by the neck and forced her to look at it. Subject by subject, grade by grade. And that distance was an absolute F. Donna stayed quiet for a long second. You think any of these elites will ever change? Omar, AOC, Clinton? Some of my addicts change. Some die, but every single one of them, right before they make a choice, hits that rock-bottom moment where they see it. They stare at the distance, and they cannot unsee it. That is what the silence means in every single one of these hearings. 12 seconds, 11 seconds, 15 seconds. That is the exact moment the illusion shatters. What they do next is on them. The true failure of politicians who win the election and refuse to do the heavy lifting, who grab the power and ignore the paperwork, who build a cult and betray their constituents, who steal the spotlight and forget the actual voters, isn't about the cameras. The real audience is the desperate woman burning 3 hours in a folding chair just to ask about her mother's Social Security. Crystal rinsed out her mug. Scalding water, zero soap, slammed upside down on the drying rack. The exact same ritual, every single night. 6 disasters, 6 deafening silences, and every single silence sounds exactly the same. It is the sound of a total fraud who landed the job and has absolutely nothing to show for it. She marched back into the group room. 8 addicts fighting for their lives, waiting for her to keep them breathing. The TV kept running in the empty break room, Johnson snapping the binder shut. Standing up, buttoning his suit. The classic, precise walk of a teacher who is completely done with your excuses. I don't even need to say it. Representative, you already know. Cut to commercial black. If you are still watching, you just witnessed a former professor absolutely decimate the most famous congresswoman in America with a brutal performance review, and she failed every single subject. Not because the teacher rigged the game, because her own record was a disaster, and numbers do not lie. Hit that like button if Mike Johnson just proved that the most lethal weapon in Washington isn't a screaming match or an attack ad. It's a cold, hard gradebook. Subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns where hard facts completely destroy fake brands, and doing the actual homework annihilates cheap hashtags. Send this video to anyone who has ever wasted 3 hours at a town hall just to watch their fake representative run away in an SUV. Drop a comment below. What was the absolute worst moment for her? Was it the Venezuela geography failure? The 20 seconds of brain-dead stuttering on Taiwan? The district office locking its doors? The 6-question hit and run? Passing 0 bills in 8 years? Or those 11 terrifying seconds of pure silence when she couldn't even grade herself? Turn on those notifications, because that State Department briefing book is 247 pages long, and she clearly didn't read a single word of it. Her district office is quietly panic opening for 2 extra days. The FEC is still hunting her campaign. The Ethics Committee is circling. And somewhere, out in Jackson Heights, Queens, a desperate woman waited 3 long hours to get help for her mother, only to watch her congresswoman take 6 measly questions and speed off in a black car. She walked in looking for a viral insult. He walked in carrying a binder. She brought 2 minutes of empty noise. He brought 11 seconds of total destruction. She performs for the cameras. He grades the reality. And the grades are permanently on the record. Like they say in school, you can scream at the teacher all you want, but you cannot argue with the transcript. God bless the constituents who wait 3 hours for 6 pathetic questions. God bless the women waiting on late checks while the phones ring dead. God bless the overworked staffers keeping the lights on while their boss goes on tour. God bless the teachers who hand out honest Fs because the student desperately needs a reality check. God bless every single American who has ever looked at a mega-famous politician and asked the one question that matters. Can you actually do the damn job? 6 questions. 1 hour. 1 getaway SUV. That is not a town hall. That is an escape route. God bless.